House in Baltimore, and can listen at WNST.net and AM 1570. Plenty of conversation in and around London, in and around the Ravens, in and around the NFL, the beginning of the cap season. The Terps are playing this weekend. And, of course, there's another little story that begins in April and usually winds down right around now. Luke spent his final evening at Oriole Park at Camden Yards before taking off for London on Monday night. Luke, I am calling this the last rites of the Orioles. I know when all we can talk about is whether Austin Hayes gets 4 at-bats tonight. If that's where we are, and I think that's where we are, they're playing out the string, as they say, by the time the Ravens go to London. And we all wonder whether this would be the case, and it is. And, there's no shame in that one way or another, but the truth is the truth. There will be no baseball here in October.
Right. They're down to the final 2 weeks or so, a little under 2 weeks now, and they're out of it. And it really comes down to they played really, really well in August. They scored runs. Their pitching wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but it was better. They got to the point where they were 3 games above 500, and then September came, and everything went away. They stopped hitting. The pitching returned to the level that we saw in most of June and July. The defense has been very, very shaky at best. At times it's been terrible, quite frankly. And even the bullpen hasn't been as strong, as stout as it's been when they've been at their best over the last 5 or 6 years. So, it's kind of just all come crashing down. They've lost 10 of 12. They haven't won consecutive games in the month of September yet. And it's amazing. You look at the wild card standings. Yes, Minnesota's still there. Yes, they've played fairly well. But even if the Orioles had been treading water over the last 2 weeks rather than losing 10 of 12, if they've just gone 500 and they were still 3 games over 500, I'd be out at the ballpark this week, and we'd be talking about the Orioles still a game and a half out of that second wild
You're
card.
better off drinking beer and eating fish and chips with us. We're going to introduce you to mushy peas on Saturday. Come on, go to London with us, man.
Well, but my point is, it was sitting right there for them, and quite frankly, it's still sitting right there.
And it sat there all year, even though they stunk. Even when they were good, they stunk. You know what I mean? Like they were a 500 team on their best day. That was the after April. That was the high water mark, was being a 500 team or being 3 over 500, and that sustained them. That's what this second wild card, I guess, most years. Now, that wasn't the case in the National League. I mean, the National League, the Rockies and Arizona were playing 580 ball at one point. They wouldn't have sniffed it. But in this year, in this grouping of teams, those 7 teams all hovered for 3 months around 500, around mediocrity, and I don't have any problem with that. I mean, there'll be a 9-17 that makes the NFL playoffs as well. But there is something about it that when you fade from that, boy, PU, right? I mean, when you can't play 500, you don't deserve to make the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's nothing that they can point to and say that, what could have been.
Yeah, we got cheated.
Their starting pitching has just been horrendous. It's been one of the worst, if not the worst, starting rotation statistically that they've ever had. So, but you said it the rest of the way. You want to see Austin Hayes. You'd like to see a little more Chance Disco. They just promoted Tanner Scott over the weekend. You'd like to see him get into a game at some point and see what he can do. But
I saw Tanner Boyle play. I mean, I'm waiting on Tanner Scott. A little bad news bears around. I'm a little loose today, dude. I mean, we're going to London,
and you kind of have to be to watch the Orioles.
And the season's, if you're going to watch 11 innings of them on a Monday night, yeah, I mean, the Monday Night Football game stunk.
And a total of 19 pitchers used between the two teams. I mean, just September baseball at its finest, I guess. But, it is what it is. And you said it a couple minutes ago. They're not good enough. They're not horrendous, but they're really not close to being good enough either. Even if we were talking about them being 3 or 4 games over 500, yeah, they'd be in the wild card race right now. It'd be far more interesting. But at the same time, would you really look at that team and think they can even make a run to the ALCS, let alone trying to win it all? I mean, they're just not equipped for that. So,
Well, a couple of things is the back of the bubblegum cards, get pasted now. And I tell you what, if you look down at Jonathan Scope year, and, there was never a point in the year where we looked at it and didn't say, wow, he's really coming on. I mean, I remember saying that in April and May, like his numbers are going to look more like Machado's numbers at the end of the year. Well, he's got a chance to hit 300. He's hitting 290 here in the last week, 297. He's been hovering around. He's already hit 33 doubles, 32 home runs, over 100 RBIs. I mean, this is one of those sort of all-timer years, right? I mean, especially if he hits 301 somehow, that's a little more magical than 294. But from a statistical standpoint, this is one of the great ones of all time. And even when you take the Alomar years or, the good Bobby Grich years or the good Davey Johnson years, whoever we've had around here, it's an all-timer. It's a Davey Johnson, Atlanta Braves kind of line, quite frankly, right?
I mean, it's been one of the best seasons the Orioles have had from a second baseman. You're right. I mean, Alomar put up some special numbers when you take into account what he did defensively, when you take into account the on-base percentage, which, Scope has a good on-base percentage at 340. I think it's 342 going into Tuesday's action. But it's been incredible to see the progression for him. He's tailed off a little bit, but his slumps have been very fleeting. He hasn't gone through these prolonged periods where he's really struggled, and that's what you kind of saw from Jonathan Scope over the last 3 years. I mean, he had some periods of time back in 2015 and 2016 where he would tear the cover off the ball for a few weeks, but then he'd go through a period of 2 or 3 weeks where he would really scuffle. He would swing at a lot of bad pitches. He wouldn't have a good idea of the strike zone. And you haven't seen that as much. I mean, he might go through a period where he doesn't swing the bat for 4 or 5 games, but then he's right back to that consistent approach, taking a few more pitches, showing a little more patience. And again, it's relative. We know he's not a patient hitter overall, but compared to what the product was 2 years ago, he has become a much more patient hitter. So it's been good to see that. Certainly Trey Mancini's had a tremendous year in his rookie season. Would certainly be in that conversation for Rookie of the Year if there weren't a guy like Aaron Judge completely running away with it and almost making a mockery of the idea of even having a Rookie of the Year award.
And we weren't even sure Trey Mancini was a Major League player. I don't know that the Yankees were sure that Aaron Judge was a Major League player, right? I mean, there's a thin line between being Trey Mancini and hitting 292 and 24 bombs and being Trey Mancini and hitting 208 and hitting 17 bombs, right? I mean, and that wouldn't smell so bad on a baseball card, but it is the difference between, let's say, where Chris Davis is in his career and where Trey Mancini is in his career, right?
Well, and I think more than anything, there's a thin line as far as having that opportunity. I mean, Aaron Judge was the last guy to make the Yankees roster. If you remember going back to spring training, there was a lot of talk whether he was going to make the club or not. Same with Trey Mancini. I mean, Mancini, coming out of spring training, I think you saw what he did at AAA the year before. You saw what he did in September for the Orioles last year. And the big question was, where was he going to play? Because they had re-signed Mark Trumbo. Chris Davis was entrenched at first base. And this was one of those rare instances where a guy learned to play another position and play it at a respectable level. I mean, Trey Mancini's played a very fine, respectable left field this year. Do I think he'll ever be a Gold Glover? No, but it just shows that if you can hit, a team will do whatever they can to try to create a position for you. Now, he's got to be athletic enough to handle it, and he has been, fortunately, but that's been good to see. But, yeah, I mean, that's when you're talking about the Orioles being out of the race at this point, when you're talking about a team that has fallen several games below 500, you kind of look at those individual measures of success, and Scope and Mancini have been at the top. Machado certainly came on in the second half of the season to make it look far more respectable for him. But, there's a case where if he hadn't hit 220 in the first half of the season, would there have been a few more wins there at some point for the Orioles? And as much as we point to the pitching, and certainly the starting pitching is the biggest factor why this team has failed, the offense has had its periods of time, some of them prolonged periods of time where they haven't produced. And certainly you look at Machado in the first half, Chris Davis the entire year, Mark Trumbo the entire year. And even though they've made up for it, guys like Scope and Mancini and Tim Beckham coming over from Tampa Bay, that's helped cover up some of those deficiencies. But the sum of the parts then not quite as strong as it could have been when you were envisioning it back in February and March. So, it just adds up to you're at that point where you're looking at some of those individual acclaims, some of those individual successes, and you're not really talking about what happens as far as wins and losses, because it really doesn't matter at this point.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. Anything you want to say about the race itself? I mean, we're running off to London for a couple of days here. We're going to be doing the fish and chips and our big party on Saturday at the Fox at XL and taking the gondola ride. By the way, are you afraid of heights? I mean, are you going to be okay on the gondola over the river?
I'm fine with heights. I mean, they're not my favorite thing, but I don't just, I do roller coasters, things like that.
Oh, I'm a wimp. I mean, about things that like ledges and stuff like that. I mean, I live up high, but I just
right.
I don't like unsuspended. It freaks me out. I'm not going to lie to you. You want to be in the cable car making fun of me and watching the little yellow puddle, between my legs as we go over the River Thames. But we're going to do that on Saturday. And meanwhile, the Orioles are going to play out the string. Anything you want to say on the pennant race, just in general? I mean, the Red Sox look like they're going to survive this thing, and the Yankees are going to be the one playing that wild card game. I have no idea how the rest of this thing's going to play out. But, from a wins and losses perspective, Houston and Cleveland still have a little fight here. Now that Cleveland has won a month without losing, they're playing it down to the finish to see who's going to have Game 7. So there still is a little bit of drama here over the last week or two.
Yeah, and those are the two teams you want to see. I mean, especially any Orioles fan, you don't want to see the Red Sox. You don't want to see the Yankees. I mean, I want to see Cleveland and Houston. I mean, they've been, Houston was the best team in the American League for, 4.5 months of the season. And since then, it's been Cleveland being unbelievable with a historic winning streak and getting themselves situated. And keep in mind, Cleveland's done a lot of this without some of their best players. I mean, Andrew Miller just came back at the end of their winning streak. So, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, certainly the second wild card, I think the Twins are a fantastic story if they ultimately are the ones standing at the end and going, presumably, to Yankee Stadium for that that coin flip one-game playoff. It'd be great to see that. I mean, the Twins they lost over 100 games last year. I mean, it's something that we haven't talked about too much because Cleveland's had the winning streak, because the Astros, ran away with this thing early on in the AL West. But the Twins have been a heck of a story. And look over to the National League. I mean, you look at what the Brewers have been able to do, hanging in there, and the Cardinals trying to hang in there. The Cubs clearly not being the juggernaut that they were last year, at least in terms of success, kind of waiting for them to turn it on. And they have turned it on in the second half, but not to the degree that a lot of people would have expected. So, there's definitely some intrigue there. I mean, there's some intrigue, I think, with the Dodgers, who had that incredible 43-7 run, absolutely historic. And then they went through the period where they couldn't get out of their own way. And
I have no idea how this is going to go. That's the beauty of the baseball playoffs. I mean, the Minnesota Twins might go to New York, beat the Yankees, and then, give the Indians or the Astros hell in the end, right?
They could. I mean, they could. I wouldn't bet on that per se, but, that's the beauty of October anyway. But it's been so much more volatile this year, I feel, than even most years. Like I mentioned with the Dodgers, I mean, they were 43-7 over a 50-game stretch, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it was historic, the best 50-game stretch in over 100 years.
And without their ace, by the way.
yeah. And then they lost 11 games in a row. I mean, who would have heard of something like that? I mean, we've all heard stories of the 84 Tigers starting 35-5, but you never heard them losing 11 in a row or 12 or 13. And I
didn't hear about that, by the way. I witnessed that. I watched them freight train the Orioles in the middle of that in May.
Sure. So, but it's just, you've seen the highs and lows. I mean, look at Houston. I mean, they were so great for most of the season, but they went through a lull there over the second half of the season for a while where they were not very good. So it's going to be fascinating. You'd love for the Orioles to be involved in it, and they have been 3 times in the last 6 years, but not going to be happening this year. They're going to be watching it at home with the rest of us. I'm very much intrigued because you have so many teams, and as much as you and I aren't Nationals fans, there's some intrigue there as far as good as that team's been. Can they finally break through the glass ceiling of getting to an NLCS or perhaps getting to a World Series? Not saying I'm rooting for that, but certainly you look at that team, the way that they're constructed, something's got to give there. I mean, they're too talented. They've been too talented over the last 4 or 5 years to not win a playoff series the way they have. So there's storylines all over the place, and very much looking forward to it, even if I can't say that I'm going to miss the 2017 version of the Orioles anyway. How's that?
Dude, you got me Googling the Tigers from '84 because that was the greatest team I ever saw. They played in Baltimore on a weekend in June. When they got to town, they were 41-13, okay? And
Yep.
they beat the Orioles on Friday night or Thursday night, 3-2. The Orioles under Flanagan threw a shutout on Friday, won 4-0. Then the Tigers beat them 10-4 on Saturday and 8-0 on Sunday to extend their record to 43-14. There were 31 games over 500 on June 10th. My dad and I went to those games. They were when the general admission were reserved because the stadium was sold out all weekend, and we had just won the World Series. We're like, all right, this is when we begin the comeback. And I don't know how far back they were. They might had to have been 8 or 10 games back at that point, right? But that weekend,
Sure.
My dad's like, they're going to get back in it this weekend. They got Boddicker on Saturday, Martinez on Sunday. They're going to be fine. And they lost 3 or 4. And my dad on the way home on Sunday said, well, the season's over, I mean, and of course we had just lost the Colts too, by the way, we had just lost the Colts 3 months earlier. So, it makes me think about baseball in a different term there. And we still haven't won a World Series since, by the way. I'm just pointing that out. We're going to have to wait another year. Luke Jones is Baltimore Luke on Twitter. I'm geezing about old school baseball, and we're trying to figure out who's going to win the World Series. But I am like you, dude. I am rooting for the Dodgers. I am rooting for the Indians. I'm rooting for the Astros. I'm rooting for new blood. And I'm not rooting for the National. Are you anti-national or are you pro-national?
I'm not really. I don't have any strong feelings against them, but I don't root for the Nationals. I mean, they're to me, they're just any other team, really. I mean, I think it's an amazing story, the talent that they've had, that they haven't been able to break through, and even get to a championship series, to get to a World Series. So, I'm rooting for some of these underdogs, at least by reputation. Certainly Cleveland, certainly Houston. The Dodgers aren't really an underdog when you look at their payroll, but it's been since '88 since they've won the World Series. So, I'd be more inclined to see some of those teams rather than the Yankees, Red Sox, and the Nats have had their chances, I suppose. And I want to sit back and watch a really intriguing postseason because I think it could go any number of directions. And over the course of the last 6 months. We've mentioned 4 or 5 of those different teams. Any of those 5 teams have had a really good argument to be the best team in baseball for a prolonged stretch. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this all plays out. Should be fun. Like I said, just lamenting the fact that the Orioles starting pitching. And really, if you look at it, just take away the trips to Yankee Stadium this year where they were just completely not even competitive. Take those away. They'd be a team in the race. So maybe they just need to petition Major League Baseball to not play any more games in the Bronx. How's that?
By the way, I went back and I did the real math on this. The Orioles played the Tigers in a doubleheader on that Sunday and were swept 10-4 and 8-0. They began the series 8.5 games behind the Tigers. They ended the series 11 back, and they never got closer. And by the way, they were 11 back and 8 games over 500.
Yeah, they weren't bad that year.
And they wound up winning 85 games that year, and the Tigers only won 104. I mean, the Tigers really cooled off. I mean, the Tigers played 500 ball the last 2 months, 3 months of the season because they were so far ahead of the curve. And I think the Dodgers. I mean, it's unsustainable to win 22 in a row. It's unsustainable to be 41-6 or whatever the hell the Dodgers were. In baseball, that's incredible, and that's why you have to go back 30 years to find another team like them, right?
I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, to see what Cleveland's done, to see what the Dodgers did earlier this year over a 50-game stretch. I mean, that's almost a third of a season. To play at that level is just incredible. To win 86% of your games for a 50-game stretch period. I mean, it's just insane. So it's going to be fascinating. But yeah, I mean, you do get some of that cooling off and regression to the mean. I mean, it's inevitable. That's why what Cleveland did, what the Dodgers did earlier this year, just amazing. And I guess for those 2 stretches alone, I think that's kind of a natural World Series matchup to have. certainly Cleveland is the new Cubs in terms of a drought of winning a World Series. The Dodgers being the powerhouse that they are from a payroll standpoint, for them to have not won in 30 years, there's some intrigue there, certainly. But I'd like to see those two teams still standing at the end just because of the two historic stretches that they had over the course of this season.
Baltimore Luke is the way to find him, Luke at WNST.net. But if you're looking for him in Maryland or Pennsylvania, you'll have to hop on a freighter and skid the ocean and get to England and find us along with John Harbaugh and the Ravens, whose boat left on Monday, from what I understand. And we'll be arriving at some point before Sunday in London. We hope to see you on Saturday at the Fox at XL in the East Side and the Docklands area. The DLR stop is Royal Victoria. We hope to see you there. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault will be there all weekend long for anything you miss around here. We're talking to lots of folks from Jacksonville about the game, broadcasters, locals, London folks. If you missed our chat with Thomas Dolby, you definitely want to check that out for some London tips. Meanwhile, Nasty at WNST.net finds me because I am, much like Mr. Angelos, a very available individual, even on the other side of the pond. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And we will be Facebooking live with Niels, my son, Luke, all of us doing crazy things. There's rock and roll involved on this trip. There's music involved on this trip. There's going to be lots of desserts and bad food and cold beer and mushy peas. So, Viva Europa. We're off to London. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.